All right. We are in the book of 1 Kings, chapter 11 this morning. 1 Kings, chapter 11. And really, at this point, we've been looking at Solomon's reign, and much of the material up through these first few chapters it's talked a lot about his wisdom and his wealth. And so today we're going to talk about his women and what is really going on. You know, much of the prosperity that you see in these opening chapters is it's kind of told to us with a wink, if you will. It's kind of given to us in such a way, you know, as if on the one hand everybody's really happy, but on the other hand there's a kind of a downfall coming. And in chapter 11 we're going to see Solomon's spiritual downfall. A couple of notes. The first two chapters of Solomon's reign began with 3 adversaries that he had to defeat for himself. And the last chapter of Solomon's reign similarly ends with 3 adversaries. Solomon's reign begins with a message from Nathan the prophet telling about how Solomon will succeed David. And it ends with a message from Ahijah the prophet talking about how Solomon's son will not inherit the total kingdom of Israel. And it is interesting to note that no prophet ever rebukes Solomon directly throughout his reign. In chapter 11, and let's go ahead and read the first, I guess we'll go ahead and look at the first 13 verses. Can I get a volunteer to read verses 1 through 13 of 1 Kings 11?
Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the sons of Israel, "You shall not associate with them, nor shall they associate with you, for they will surely turn your heart away after their gods." Solomon held fast to these in love. He had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned his heart away. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods. His heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God as the heart of David his father had been. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the detestable idol of the Ammonites. Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not follow the Lord fully as his father David had done. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the detestable idol of Moab, on the mountain which is east of Jerusalem. Molech, the detestable idol of the sons of Ammon. Thus he did for all his foreign wives who burned incense and sacrificed to their gods. Now the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and had commanded him concerning this thing that he should not go after other gods, if he did not observe what the Lord had said. So the Lord said to Solomon, "Because you have not done this, and you have not kept my commandments and my statutes, which I have commanded you, I will surely tear the kingdom from you and give it to your servant. Nevertheless, I will not do it in your days for the sake of your father David, but I will tear it out of the hand of your son. However, I will not tear away all the kingdom. I will give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen."
All right. Solomon has a lot of wives. At the end of chapter 10, we noted a couple things. That Solomon was importing a lot of horses, 1,400 chariots and 12,000 horsemen in chapter 10 and verse 26. Also that he was importing a lot of money. He made silver as common as stones in Jerusalem. And of course, the bulk of chapter 10 is devoted to the fact that Solomon has a lot of gold multiplied for himself as well. Now, what did the law say about those things? Anybody remember? What is a king not supposed to do? Don't go back to Egypt to multiply horses. Horses are the one thing that's singled out with Egypt in the case of Deuteronomy 17. As well as don't multiply gold for himself. And the third thing was, don't multiply wives for yourself, which is what we get to in chapter 11. Solomon had a lot of wives. He had 700 wives, and then he had 300 concubines on top of that. Solomon never does anything halfway. And these marriages, you know, why would he have had so many marriages like this? What would this have been for? Okay, probably the product of political alliances. Help multiply gold for himself. Does the text tell us about Solomon's political alliances in regard to these wives? It mentions Egypt in chapter 3, yes. But really, this text isn't so interested in Solomon's politics. It's interested in his affections. What is the problem with Solomon here? What is the real problem at his heart and soul? Okay, he trusts in physical things instead of spiritual things. Another way we might put that, who does Solomon love? Does Solomon love the Lord? Ah, okay. And that's the problem, because in the reign of Solomon, in the life of Solomon, love is talked about in 3 different places. In 2 Samuel 12:24, when Solomon is born, it says that the Lord loved Solomon. That's pretty good. In 1 Kings chapter 3 and verse 3, it says that Solomon loved the Lord. That's also pretty good. But in chapter 11 and verse 1, it says Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Hittite, Sidonian women. So what happens here is that Solomon's heart is divided. You'll notice how heavily his heart features in this text. In verse 2, the warning in the law was that if you marry these foreigners, they will turn your heart away after other gods. In verse 3, it says that his wives turned his heart away. In verse 4, when he was old, his wives turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not wholly devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. This problem begins in the heart. His heart is not where it should be. It's also interesting, Solomon has not read the words of King Lemuel in Proverbs 31 and verse 3, "Do not give your strength to women or your ways to that which destroys king." If only he had read the last part of the book that mostly is credited to him. He might have heard that. It's interesting. What does Solomon's behavior here teach us about the nature of wisdom? Okay, there's wisdom of God and there's wisdom of men. Doesn't do much good if you don't listen. I think it kind of shows something. I don't know about you, but when I hear people define wisdom, they say, well, knowledge is the stuff you know, and wisdom is the application of that. The only problem is that Solomon is called very, very wise by the Bible, but he clearly doesn't apply everything he knows. So, was he wise? That's the question. He was wise in the ways of the world. Who made him wise, though? God did. Okay. Right.
Wisdom, I thought I had this sorted out in my mind. The wisdom was there for him, and God gave it to him if he chose to use it.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, might put it that way.
So he has wisdom, but he doesn't utilize it. Okay, all right. There's some. Does Solomon ever use wisdom in his life? Of course he does. Yeah. All right, so it's not like he didn't have it at his disposal.
Actually, we might say the biggest time he used it.
That's an interesting thing to contemplate and reflect upon. It talks about, Solomon is considered greater than all the kings of the earth in chapter 10 and verse 23 in riches and wisdom. When does the problem with the foreign wives creep up, though? When does Solomon's apostasy happen? According to this text. When he was old. That's right. And the change of heart is subtle and gradual. Did Solomon marry these wives when he was old? Not all of them. Did he marry some of them when he was young? We know that he married some of them when he was young because Solomon reigns for 40 years. His son Rehoboam is 41 years old when he becomes king, and he's the son of, guess what? An Ammonite woman. So Solomon's married some of these women before he even became king. That's what's interesting about this whole mess. At this point, we're seeing kind of a breakdown of what the husband-wife relationship is meant to be, almost certainly. There's never an instance in the Bible where a man being married to multiple wives works out good for everybody. It usually ends badly, in tears. And so, that's a lot. Yeah, well, yeah, I mean, do the math.
Time they had the wedding night, and harem where they
Yeah.
served him in the harem.
All right. The 300 and...
So I began.
All right. Well, he probably had favorites. That's what this is really about. You know, I mean, and you do the math, okay? You know, there's 360 days in a Jewish year, as opposed to our 365-day year. There's 360 days in a Jewish year, and he's got 1,000 different women. So how long is it going to take if he just spends a night with each and every one of them? It's going to take him more than 3 years to get it all the way around. You know, there is a certain problem here of his divided affections. The text doesn't really get into that, but you know, not only is his affection divided between the Lord and these foreign women, but he can't even, you know, this affection is divided 1,000 different ways too. So there's that to think about. There's the change of Solomon's heart is subtle and gradual. You know, he may have found some of these wives in his youth, but it's in his old age that he turns to idols. Because old age is just as much a time for spiritual pitfalls as youth is. It is the time when people are prone to forget their former zeal for the Lord, to forget their former wisdom, and to instead fall prey to compromise and complacency. When Solomon was young, he was wise beyond his years. And when he was old, well, he was a young fool. Kind of interesting how the situation tends to reverse itself in the human experience. And it does that with, you know, quite frequently in the Bible, we notice. The post-exilic literature saw Solomon as an example of how a wise man can be destroyed by the bad influence of his wife. In Nehemiah chapter 13 and verses 25 through 27, it says, I contended with them and cursed them and struck some of them and pulled out their hair and made them swear by God, you shall not give your daughters to their sons, nor take of their daughters for your sons for yourselves. This is Nehemiah speaking. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin regarding these things? Yet among many nations there was no king like him. He was loved by his God. God made him king over all Israel. Nevertheless, the foreign women caused even him to sin. Do we then hear about you that you have committed all this great evil by acting unfaithfully against our God by marrying foreign women? If Solomon, the wisest man in the world, is not immune to this stuff, neither are you, Nehemiah says. And for that matter, neither are any of us. Done. Holy. Mm-hmm. Yes. As a result of these foreign marriages, Solomon brings something back into Israel that we haven't seen in the recorded history in quite a while. He brings back idolatry. He worships, and I mean, Solomon is, you know, quite the pluralistic religious society he's promoting here. He worships the Ashtoreth of Sidon, the Milcom of the Ammonites. He actually builds high places in Jerusalem for Chemosh of Moab and Molech of Ammon. He commits a sin that David had not committed and that not even Saul had committed, as far as we know. Idolatry. Now, there's a Jewish literature that tries to soften the blow by saying that, some of the Talmud tries to soften the blow by saying Solomon didn't really build them, he just didn't stop his wives from building them. But that's not what the Bible says. The high places Solomon set up continued to stand until the days of Josiah. I saw a hand, Keith.
Here again, verse.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Power corrupts. Yeah. Don. Mhm. There's something to the fact that throughout the book of Kings, the spiritual health of the nation is usually determined by the status of one man in his relationship with the Lord, the king. And Solomon's position? Well, Solomon is the one that drives the nation into apostasy. Both of his successors, when the kingdom divides, neither one of them is faithful to the Lord. Neither his son Rehoboam nor Jeroboam, who inherits the 10 tribes that were torn away from him. They both succumb to idolatry, we see. This idolatry, the legacy that Solomon sets of building high places and sacrificing on them, does not actually go away until the time of Josiah. In 2 Kings 23 in verse 13, we learn that it was in the time of Josiah that the high places which were before Jerusalem, which were on the right of the Mount of Destruction, which Solomon the king of Israel had built for the Ashtoreth, the abomination of the Sidonians, and for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Milcom, the abomination of the sons of Ammon, the king defiled. They're still there in the time of Josiah. Not even Hezekiah tore them down. And Hezekiah was a pretty extensive reformer. He tore down lots of high places. But Solomon's legacy was hard to undo. There's another lesson there implicit in how our actions have repercussions for generations and generations after ourselves. People who will forget your name will be impacted by decisions that you make today. Mark.
The idolatry never started from the temple. At that time, it seems like it was
eventually.
But also, here, verse 6, did not follow the Lord fully, but that follows the statement where it says Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the explanation of what he did that was evil was he did not follow the Lord fully. If we don't follow the Lord fully, we are doing evil.
Okay, now there's something that you're touching on, something I want to get to next. The idea throughout the book of Kings, every king that we're going to see in the divided kingdom gets an evaluation from the Lord. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, or he did what was good in the sight of the Lord. If you read Kings, this happens with regularity. Now, there's one unifying feature to all of these statements, and because sometimes the good kings do bad stuff and sometimes the bad kings do good stuff, and so we're kind of scratching our heads going, why are they evaluated this way? The one unifying feature of these statements of who is good and who is bad relates to the way they treat the temple and their relationship with the temple of the Lord. The kings that help fix the temple and regularly enforce the temple worship and try to stop people from worshiping in other places, those kings do good. The two kings that do best, Hezekiah and Josiah, are the ones who tear down the high places so people will only worship at the temple. Kings that desecrate the temple by building false idols and building false altars or just not worshiping the temple correctly, they get negative evaluations. And of course this also explains every single king in Israel gets a negative evaluation because none of them worshipped at the temple. Jeroboam stopped them from going to the temple, set up golden calves at Bethel and Dan instead, and, well, nobody ever actually broke away from that legacy. So, all that said, Solomon only gets one evaluation in the book, like everybody else. And what is his evaluation? He did evil in the sight of the Lord. Now that's kind of a shocker, because what was Solomon's relationship with the temple? He built the thing. Building the temple doesn't mean that you have correctly worshipped in the temple. Yeah, I know! He warned him twice in chapter 6 and in chapter 9. You better be faithful to me or this house won't protect you. It won't protect the people. I will forsake this house. I will destroy it. I will tear the kingdom away from you and your sons will not remain on the throne. The Lord, faithfulness to the Lord comes above everything else. And even if you're the guy that built the thing, if you are unfaithful to the Lord, well, then you are evaluated as evil in the sight of the Lord. This is Solomon's only evaluation in the book. This is the statement that earns kings frowny faces on the classroom wall in Bible class, and Solomon gets the frowny face. If you've been in a Bible class and and you've seen those little charts, you know what I'm talking about. Mark.
This building which Solomon built, the Lord wanted him to build, was not important to God. Why do we
question. And the actual physical edifice that the Lord had them build, as opposed to the ones that mankind builds as an exercise of his own liberty, there's a whole other thing in there, and you will get me on a soapbox that I don't want to get on today. But think about it. That's all I got to say. Okay. Now God, of course, let's find out what God thinks of this whole mess. This is the first time we kind of see, the Lord hasn't really commented on Solomon's wealth or Solomon's horses or anything like that. It's just kind of mentioned that they happened. The Lord didn't say that was bad, or He didn't say that the Lord got angry. But in verse 9, the Lord was angry with Solomon because his heart was turned away from the Lord, the God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice. Actually, if you count times in 1 Kings, it's actually 3 times, but there's a textual issue. Jen? Yeah, God gave him the wealth. He gave him the wisdom. Doesn't ever say He gave him the wives, but what eventually happens? Well, He didn't give him the other gods either. Mm-hmm. Yes, Don. Oh, sorry, you were. Sorry. Exactly. The heart of the problem is the problem of the heart. That's what's wrong here. The Lord is angry at Solomon's actions. Fidelity means exclusivity. No other gods means no other gods. God tolerates no rival. He tolerates no religious pluralism. And, even if you have a good role model like David and you have a personal revelation, Solomon has God appear to him and talk to him personally. How many of you have that? And Solomon did evil in the sight of the Lord. Solomon wrote possibly 3 books of the Bible. And this is what happens to him. Think about that. Does writing a book of the Bible guarantee that you will be saved? No, it does not. It says that the Lord had appeared to him twice. The more God had revealed to Solomon, the more accountable he became. What did Jesus say in Luke chapter 12 and verse 48? To whom much is given, much will be required. Solomon had been given more than anyone. Did he own up to those requirements? Did he measure up to the standard? Does not appear that way. So because Solomon had apostatized, God plans to tear the kingdom away and give it to his servant. Now, where have we seen that before? What does that sound like? Yeah? Yeah. Not only that, it's the same word, tearing the kingdom away. It's the same thing that Samuel said to Saul, the Lord now says to Solomon. Solomon's legacy, even though David was his physical father, in some ways Saul becomes his spiritual father in this story. Solomon finds commonality not with David, the man after God's own heart, but rather by Saul, who corrupted his way before the Lord. Yes, Jen?
I was wondering why there wasn't.
We're going to get to that. But yeah, we're going to talk about it. Jeroboam has a promise that's very similar to David's, but he blows it. All right? Now, what did the Lord tell Solomon? There are 2 caveats, though. 2 caveats that Saul didn't have. And what are they? Okay, all right. The first caveat is, I'm not going to take it all away from you because of David. All right? And it won't happen until... What's the other thing? It won't happen in your lifetime. The 2 caveats are not now and not all. And they're both for the same reason. Because of David and the promise to David, and because of Jerusalem, the city which God had chosen. Throughout this whole chapter, by the way, and you can just read it and note how many times the text mentions the fact that the Lord is doing stuff for the sake of the promise to David. The Lord isn't acting because, Solomon's such a great guy. He's acting in spite of Solomon's wickedness because of a promise he made to David. And also, the other theme that we see resonating in this text several times is that Jerusalem is the city that God has chosen. In verse 13, it talks about Jerusalem that I've chosen. In verse 32, same thing, the city of Jerusalem which I have chosen. And in verse 38, the city of Jerusalem which I have chosen. Is it verse 38? Okay, it's not verse 38, so apparently I miswrote the verse on here. But, it's mentioned several times throughout this chapter. It's emphasized that Jerusalem is the city which God has chosen. All right, that's Solomon's apostasy, 13 verses. Any comments or questions down to there? All right, I am being a little rapid fire this morning because this chapter has a lot of stuff in it, and I really want to get through it. It's the Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, and really what we see here is the Lord raises up a series of 3 adversaries. The Lord raised up an adversary to Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was of the royal line in Edom. For it came about when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain, and had struck down every male in Edom. For Joab and all Israel stayed there 6 months until he had cut off every male in Edom. But Hadad fled to Egypt, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him. While Hadad was a young boy, they arose from Midian and came to Paran, and they took men with them from Paran and came to Egypt, to Pharaoh king of Egypt, who gave him a house and assigned him food and gave him land. Now Hadad found great favor before Pharaoh, so that he gave him in marriage the sister of his own wife, the sister of Tahpenes the queen. The sister of Tahpenes bore his son Genubath, whom Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house, and Genubath was in Pharaoh's house among the sons of Pharaoh. But when Hadad heard in Egypt that David slept with his fathers and that Joab the commander of the army was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Send me away, that I may go to my own country." And Pharaoh said to him, "What have you lacked with me, that behold you are seeking to go to your own country?" He answered, "Nothing. Nevertheless, you must surely let me go." Question, and we could talk, there's quite a few things we could say about Hadad the Edomite. What does this story remind us of? What's it sound kind of like? Joseph? Why Joseph? He has to go marry his father. Right. Yeah. Now there's, of course, another more prominent story where someone asks Pharaoh to let them go. Moses asking, yeah. But it's a good that I hadn't thought of Joseph, but it's. But what I thought of was Moses and Pharaoh. What we have here, first of all, we have a throwback, a recall of an event from David's reign when David and Joab defeated the Ammonites. We read about that in 2 Samuel 8. God used events from before Solomon was even born to set in motion events at the end of Solomon's reign. Kind of interesting how God does that. Shows something about how God maneuvers nations on the scenes of human history. But Egypt grants Hadad the Edomite asylum. And Hadad even got to marry into the royal family. And like Israel, Hadad gets his own exodus. Let me go. Echoes Moses' request to Pharaoh to let the people go. But Pharaoh's a lot friendlier to Hadad. And so Hadad learns that Joab is dead and goes to become Solomon's adversary. It's also interesting that, who killed Joab, by the way? Who had Joab killed? Solomon did. So there's a certain turnabout happening in this story as well. Solomon has Joab executed, and because of the news of Joab's execution, he now creates a new adversary for himself at the end of his reign in the process of eliminating his old one at the beginning of his reign. So it shows how God uses events in ways that none of us could have thought of or fathomed of to create the present situation. There's another little thing going on here too, though. What was Solomon's relationship with Pharaoh like?
Apparently pretty good.
Why?
Well, because his daughter, the wife, bought horses and chariots. Probably other goods from Egypt, so they probably had a trade agreement.
Solomon was married into the royal family. What is Hadad doing? He's married into the royal family. And what happens? He becomes Solomon's adversary. That's what's crazy about this whole thing, is that it's kind of an implicit criticism of how futile Solomon's foreign alliance really was. Because, oh look, you made a foreign alliance with Pharaoh. Hey, look, I can do that too. Now I'm your adversary and you can't touch me. What did Solomon's foreign alliances really get him in the end? Trouble. There you go. All right. Another adversary. By the way, fun fact I don't know what to make of it, but the word for adversary is the Hebrew word, the same word used for Satan. Now, the name Satan means adversary. And so every time the text says he's raising up an adversary, it says he's raising up a Satan for him. Now, that doesn't mean these people are literally Satan. It means that, well, I mean, it may have no significance whatsoever, but I thought it was interesting to see that. Verse 23, God raised up another adversary to him, Rezon, the son of Eliada, who had fled from his lord Hadadezer, king of Zobah. He gathered men to himself and became leader of a marauding band after David slew them of Zobah. And they went to Damascus and stayed there and reigned in Damascus. So he was an adversary to Israel all the days of Solomon, along with the evil that Hadad did. And he abhorred Israel and reigned over Aram. All right. Now, once again, we have a throwback to something that happened during the wars of David in 2 Samuel 8. All right? And what do we know about Hadadezer? What was David's relationship with Hadadezer, the son of Zobah? Or the king of Zobah? Hadadezer, I don't know how to say it. Anybody remember? Was David friends with this guy or his enemies? 2 Samuel 8. He defeated him, which would imply that they were what? Enemies, right? Not friends, not frenemies, enemies. And so David defeated this guy, right? But this other guy in 1 Kings 11 is Rezon. Is Rezon a friend of Hadadezer? According to chapter 11 and verse 23? No, he's not. So here's kind of an interesting situation. David defeats Hadadezer, and now this other guy who was a rival to Hadadezer, who didn't like him, suddenly becomes an adversary to the house of David. Why is that? Well, because what happened was when David defeated Hadadezer, he left a power vacuum in the city of Damascus, which Rezon was only too happy to fill. But he didn't love Israel. He abhorred Israel. He became an adversary to Solomon. And what follows is the establishment of a kingdom in Aram and Damascus that continues to be a thorn in Israel's side for much of the remainder of the divided kingdom history. You think about it, how many times, we're going to see the Arameans over and over and over again getting into fights with Israel through guys like Ben-Hadad and Hazael and Ben-Hadad II. They fought against Baasha, against Ahab and Jehoshaphat, against much of the house of Jehu. And no matter what the dynasty was in Israel, Aram was at war with them until the time came when they allied with Pekah and tried to stop the Assyrians, and the Assyrians didn't like that very much and killed old Rezon, king of Damascus, and burned the city to the ground. But that doesn't happen until several hundred years later. So we'll get to that eventually. And then we get Jeroboam. And Jeroboam's a little different from Hadad and Rezon, because Jeroboam is within Israel itself. And now is the point where I'm going to volunteer to read verses 26 through 40.
Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, an Ephraimite of Sereda, Solomon's servant, whose mother's name was Zeruiah, a widow, also rebelled against the king. Now this was the reason why he rebelled against King Solomon. King Solomon built a villa and closed up the breach of the city of his father David. Now the man Jeroboam was a valiant warrior, and when Solomon saw that the young man was industrious, he appointed him over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. And it came about at that time that Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite found him on the road. Now Ahijah had clothed himself with a new cloak, and both of them were alone in the field. But then Ahijah took hold of the new cloak which was on him and tore it into 12 pieces. And he said to Jeroboam, "Take for yourself 10 pieces, thus says the Lord, the God of Israel. Behold, I will tear the kingdom out of the hand of Solomon and tribe, but he will have one tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen from all the tribes of Israel. Because they have forsaken me ways, and doing what was right in my sight, and observing my statutes and my ordinances, as his father David did. Nevertheless, I will not take the whole kingdom out of him, but I will make him ruler all the days of his life for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, to observe my commandments and my statutes. But I will take the kingdom from his son's hand, and give it to you, in pride. But to his son I will give one tribe, that my servant David may have a lamp always before me in Jerusalem, the city where I have chosen myself. I will take you, and you shall reign over whatever you desire. Then it will be that if you listen to all that I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right by observing my statutes and my commandments, as my servant David did, then I will be with you and build you an enduring house as I built for David. I will give Israel to you. Thus I will afflict the descendants of David for this, but not always. Solomon sought therefore to put Jeroboam to death. And Jeroboam arose and fled to Egypt. Shishak, king of Egypt, then Egypt, to death.
Okay, Jen. Why wasn't he anointed? I have no idea. I've wondered that too, but I don't know exactly why. I mean, maybe it's just the text doesn't record him being anointed because, it's trying to set him apart from David, subtly anyway. The text is being very ambiguous about Jeroboam's role in the story at this point. That changes in chapter 12, whenever we get to chapter 12 and we see that Jeroboam becomes the one who made Israel to sin. Jeroboam is basically what David is to Israel. Jeroboam is the opposite. Jeroboam is like the anti-David. He is the one he's the negative standard by which all other kings are measured. Now Jeroboam, he starts out, it seems okay. He's an Ephraimite, he's a hard worker, he's a mighty warrior. It's the same expression used of both Saul and David before they became king in 1 Samuel 9, 10, and 16. It might be a reference to his stature, but that's not clear. The statement that he rebelled against the king is ambiguous, to say the least, because we don't know the exact nature of his rebellion. Whether he tried to jump the gun on the promise here, or whether what happened was more just the fact that he even accepted Ahijah's promise means that he was now counted as a rebel in the same way that David was. I don't know, and I'm not really willing to speculate beyond that point. What really happens, though, here is that we have this lengthy conversation between Jeroboam and the prophet Ahijah. Ahijah was from Shiloh, the home of the old tabernacle. He's wearing a new cloak. And he takes his cloak and he tears it into pieces. What does that remind us of? Is there another Bible story that could remind us of?
Saul.
You're both right. You're both right. And it's a wordplay on the fact that God is tearing the kingdom away from Solomon. Ahijah tears the robe into 12 pieces just as God is tearing the kingdom away from Solomon. The only thing is that those verbs appear in 1 Samuel 15. Samuel tries to leave Saul. Saul grabs his robe and it tears his robe. And Samuel in response makes a pun on that by saying, the Lord has torn the kingdom away from you. Same expression. So what happens here is Saul tears Samuel's robe, and Samuel used that as a pun to describe tearing the kingdom from Saul. Ahijah tears his own robe with a similar pun to describe God tearing the kingdom away from Solomon. But there's a little twist on this. He tears the robe into 12 pieces. He gives 10 pieces to Jeroboam. Why? God's giving him 10 tribes, and Solomon's going to be left with 1. Now, anybody who's a anybody who's a math person here is automatically going to go, wait a second. When did 10 plus 1 equal 12? Well, no,
Judah, Simeon was kind of absorbed into Judah originally, but then Benjamin kind of was absorbed into Judah as well and became part of Judah.
Well, yeah, there actually is a right answer to this. And what we see is in chapter 12 and verse 21, it was Benjamin that explicitly is said to have stayed with Judah. In Chronicles, there's a reference to Simeon being incorporated into the northern tribes, actually. So I don't know how that happened, but Simeon is considered one of the 10, not one of these 2. But in chapter 12 and verse 21, it says, when Rehoboam had come to Jerusalem, he assembled all the house of Judah and the tribe of Benjamin. 180,000 chosen men who were warriors. Rehoboam's army is from Judah and Benjamin, it says. And a little later in chapter 15 and verse 22, there's a similar reference. Asa made a proclamation to all Judah. None was exempt. They carried away the stones of Ramah, timber which Baasha had built. And King Asa built with them Geba of Benjamin and Mitzpah. So Asa is doing construction in the tribe of Benjamin. Also, the city of Jerusalem, where was it located? The tribe of Benjamin. So that's another connection that's made there. So technically he gets the tribe of Judah, but he also gets the tribe of Benjamin, which was the location of the city of Jerusalem, which the Lord had chosen for his name. Now, I don't know why he didn't just hand him 2 pieces instead of 1. That's one of those questions for the ages. You can ask Ahijah when we get to heaven, if you're really concerned about it at that point. All right, we are out of time and don't have time to finish the chapter, but I appreciate your comments, and we will pick up next time and get into chapter 12 a little bit and the division of the kingdom. We're going to be shifting gears in this class a little bit. Thank you all for your discussion.